Hi, Lisa.
Carol?
You know, I'm trying to blur my background, which I had before, and I had to take the blur off because of something I had to do on this computer, and now I can't blur it again. Ridiculous.
It looks good.
But still, I don't want everyone to see my office.
All I can see is the top of a printer and some books and a print on the wall. That looks good. Very scholarly.
Thank you very much, but still. Hi, Scott. How are you?
You look really good.
Well,
I
thank
have-
you very
Scott.
much.
Hi, Lisa. You look good too. I have a hello. You might hear in the background upstairs, Anita is doing yoga with somebody in Brazil. She sends a hug to both of you.
Oh, okay. To her too.
Mhm.
Hello, Professor. How are you?
Hello.
Your mute
Good to
is
see
on.
everybody.
Yeah. As promised, my third cup of coffee.
Oh, I have a half a liter of water by my side to get me
Yes,
through.
I have some of that too.
I want another light. I'm going to turn this light. I don't like this light.
Yes, top light is not good.
Scott, are you in New York?
I'm in Chicago, and I laugh because I got here last night and my calendar did a funny thing since I'm an hour earlier than New York, but it made it, since I had set it up in Indiana, I was on this site at 8:30 because it had, it was dyslexic. Let's just say that.
Oh dear.
Okay.
Oh dear.
All right.
Oh,
All right.
oh, let me get ready. And I said, wait a second, this isn't right.
So, Professor, you're the only one that's in time. Okay.
Is the author of our esteemed author, is he in Nigeria or is he in the US right now?
I don't know. I have no idea. Okay. So Our conference people are sending us email, like messages. So I'm going to go down, good afternoon.
How's Bahia, Lisa?
It's been raining like crazy.
Okay.
Very good for writing. Gives you a reason to stay at home and inside.
There you go. There you go. Is Sabrina there now? I heard she was coming.
Yes, I haven't spoken to her because I've been really busy. But
Tell her I
she's
say
here.
hi when you see her.
Okay.
So we're just missing a couple of other people along with Niyi, of course. So
Felix, let me see. He was contacting me by Zoom, so let me see if okay, I just sent him a WhatsApp.
okay.
Great fabric, Cheryl.
Oh, thank you very much. So are you liking Notre Dame?
It works for me. I think the thing for me, Cheryl, within this crazy milieu of the academy, that I'm in this Africana Studies department that is very nurturing, that has a mandate to increase its size dramatically. It still will be a small department. And we have a relatively new institute on race and resilience that's university-wide.
Yeah.
We attract a certain student within the kind of Notre Dame student. So I kind of have a line of defense against the kind of boarding school elite white kid that is most typically a Notre Dame student. So people who want to take an Africana Studies class are halfway towards what I would like to be teaching selfishly. Because I almost was hired split with Anthro. And I think it would have been different if I was just an Anthro, because I would have just gotten the whole shooting match.
Yeah.
And I found the kind of Black, brown, queer, liberal, whatever group of professors that I can hang with. So I've found some kindred spirits. So that's working.
That's good. That's very good. Yeah. What kind of Catholic are the people at Notre Dame? What's their,
I think I'm so bad. They're Irish Catholic, which I don't know if that is exactly the same as Roman Catholic, if they follow.
No, there's a denomination like, are they Jesuits or,
Oh, they're
like,
not Jesuits. They would be,
Yeah,
I've heard it would be better if they were Jesuits, because Jesuits are more liberal.
not,
I've heard
they
that.
are and they aren't,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, they're more liberal with the queer stuff in some ways,
Yes.
and not so liberal with some other things, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And there's I'll say, I'm in a red state. I never was in a place that had sports as a focus.
Can I just interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
It looks like one of our panelists, she's in as an attendee, not a panelist.
How is that?
Afolabi, isn't she one of our panelists, or he? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can, and has raised her or his hand.
Okay.
I don't know how to contact.
Good afternoon.
See, Afolabi is trying to get in here. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Okay, there you are.
There you are.
Hello,
Okay.
how are you?
Welcome.
Yes. Thank you for elevating me to the panelists.
Okay.
If life was always so easy.
Okay, here are our conference people. Okay. And I know Afolabi was trying to get in and he wasn't successful as yet.
No, I see him. He's there.
You see him?
He's not visually represented, but his cipher is there.
I tried to call Felix. He didn't answer. But he had contacted me at 11:26.
Okay. So Can you send him another, you sent him another note that we're in? Because I'm
Yeah,
not,
I did.
Yeah, it's already in. It's just not visually visible.
he is, because I
Yes.
can't see.
Okay.
I'm talking about Felix Omidire.
Oh, not Felix. I'm talking of
Yeah.
Niyi. Yeah.
Yes,
He-
yes.
he's-
Niyi is there.
Niyi is
he's-
here, but Felix is lost in cyberspace
Okay.
Why is it that I can't see me though?
because he doesn't have his camera turned on.
No, I mean, I'm not even seeing his name.
Oh, I see. I'm seeing it.
I
Okay,
see it.
I see it as a panelist.
okay. All right, okay, I have to go into another screen. Okay, so we just need Felix now, and then we can get started.
Mm-hmm. Let me try to call him again.
Okay, yeah.
He's not answering. I don't know what happened.
Okay, so should we give him like a couple more minutes and then we'll just get started?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea because we also don't have any audience at this moment.
Yeah, we do,
We do?
yes,
Really?
yes,
They are not visible, but we do.
Oh,
Yes.
I see. Oh, I see in the conference room at the conference
Yes,
itself.
yes, we
Okay,
do.
hello, how are you all?
yeah.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, so we don't want, we don't want to keep them waiting for too long. Good
That's right.
afternoon, folks.
Sorry, let me. Okay, the video is on. They can hear you. Oh, you can talk to them. Ah, okay. It's writing missing. Why not turn it into a social group? What's supposed to start? Yeah, they're waiting for someone.
We have one of our panelists is missing at the moment, so we're just giving him a few minutes to join, and then we'll get started. Mhm. And of course, I'm still sipping my coffee because I'm in mourning, you know.
In the meantime, I believe that we've lost our author. Oh, there he's back again.
He's back.
He's there.
Okay. Okay. I'll just give him another minute. I just sent him in WhatsApp also, so.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm ringing him right now on WhatsApp. Well, maybe in the meantime, Cheryl, I don't know, maybe we could think about
Yeah, we'll get
presentations.
started. Yeah. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Well, everyone who's in Lagos, and good morning, good afternoon to good evening to others around in different spaces and places. It's my task to kind of introduce everyone, and I thought we would go in the order of the introduction, but except for our author, of course, but I think we will have to kind of skip that order in some ways. So, but first I'd like to introduce our author who of this text for today, Relocating the Sacred African Divinities and Brazilian Cultural Hybridities. So our author, Niyi Afolabi, is a professor of Portuguese and Afro-Brazilian Studies in the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. He's the author of The Golden Cage, Afro-Brazilians, Cultural Production in a Racial Democracy, Ile in Brazil and the Reinvention of Africa, Identities in Flux, Race, Migration, and Citizenship, and of course now Relocating the Sacred African Divinities and Cultural Hybridities, and numerous articles, edited volumes on transatlantic migration and the African diaspora. So we're all here gathered to speak about this new volume of his. So I will introduce our other speakers. Let me begin with Felix, and so that when he comes, he can just kind of join in without us interrupting. So Felix Omidire is a professor of Brazilian and Afro-Latin American Studies at the Obafemi Ayowolo University in Ile-Ife, where he was the past director of the Institute of Cultural Studies. He is also an associate researcher at the Institute de Letras, Federal University of Bahia, Brazil, and has been a visiting professor of Yoruba diaspora and African identity studies there for many years. His research interest centers on the intersection between the Yoruba worldview and the construction of cultural identities in Latin American and Caribbean societies, which he calls, and he's dubbed this term Yorubanidade. He is the author of some 16 books and close to 100 articles, and his major works include Yorubanidade, or a literatura matriz epistemica nago na construção de uma identidade afrocultural nas Américas, and a series of didactic materials for the teaching of Yoruba as a heritage language in Brazil, titled Ekodara, Cursos de Língua e Cultura Yoruba. And of course, Felix is currently a Gast Professor for African Diaspora Studies at Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. So for our first speaker will be Funso Afolabi, and he holds a PhD in African history from Obafemi Awolowo. I'm sorry, I'm not enough coffee. Awolowo University in Ile-Ife, Nigeria. He has held a number of research and teaching positions, including one at Obafemi Awolowo University, Nigeria, Department of Religions, Amherst College, and in the Department of History and African and Afro-American Studies program, Washington University in St. Louis. Sorry, I can hear stuff that's getting into my ear. He's currently teaches history and African studies at the University of New Hampshire, Durham, and where he's also served as a director of the Religious Studies program and the African and African American Studies program. In addition to book chapters and publications in journals, he's the co-author of Yoruba Sacred Kingship, A Power Like That of the Gods. from Washington Press and the author of Culture and Customs of South Africa. Okay, our next speaker will be Lisa Earle Castillo, who's an independent scholar based in Brazil and received her doctorate from the Federal University of Bahia in Salvador. And she's the author of Entre a Oralidade e a Escrita Etnografia. I don't know why I cannot speak either language today. A Escrita Etnografia nas Candomblés da Bahia, a study of the historic uses of writing and photography in Afro-Brazilian Candomblé communities and how ethnographic research about them is perceived by those very communities. She has also published numerous articles on the history of Candomblé temples found by freed Yoruba speakers during the time of slavery. Thank you for joining us, sir. And our next speaker, and you too, sir. Now you're here. Okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I had issues.
Hey, Baba Oloye.
Ẹ kú iṣẹ́ o, ẹ kú dìde o.
Ẹ máa bú ìlú. Ẹ kú gbogbo.
Okay. You could have done your greetings much earlier, sirs. Okay. Okay. So our next person will be Professor Akin Mayowa Akin Otiko, who's a senior research fellow at the Institute of African and Diaspora Studies at the University of Lagos and a principal investigator in the Lagos African Cluster Center at the African Multiple Cluster of Excellence, University of Beirut, Germany. His field of interest cuts across the belief systems and the traditional methods of healthcare of Africans. In 2019 to 2020, he was awarded a fellowship of the Africa Multiple Cluster of Excellence at the Beirut Academy of Advanced African Studies, Universitat Beirut, where he developed a bioethical theory of engagement between traditional healthcare providers and their patients. He has been involved in a number of grants that focus on ethics, religion, and healthcare. He believes in rights, highlighting pluralism of religion and healthcare methods. Okay, our final reviewer will be Scott Alves Barton, who is a food scholar and assistant professor in Africana Studies at Notre Dame, and he was previously a fellow in the Initiative for Race and Resilience and a postdoc at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Notre Dame. Scott serves on the board of Association for the Study of Food and Society, the Society for the Anthropology of Nutrition, as the co-chair of the African Diaspora Religions at the American Academy of Religion. As a chief scholar, Scott's research, photography, and filmmaking are centered in Northeast Brazil at the intersection of sacred and profane Afro-Brazilian foodways, women's work, and knowledge production. Scott also has an embodied practice as a public scholar, producer, tied to issues of women's work, enslavement, agriculture, hospitality, and an extended residency at Linden Sculpture Garden, Milwaukee. His 2022 exhibition of Linden, Buried in the Heart, A Repast for Angels and Martyrs, is the basis of his current manuscript project. And I'm Cheryl Sterling. I'm Associate Professor of African Studies and English at Penn State University, and the ex officio Director of African Studies at Penn State and Black Studies at City College. I'm a Fulbright scholar. I don't know why I put that there. My areas of research include representation and aesthetics in African and African diaspora literature, post-colonial theory, race, gender, and social and cultural movements in Brazil. And my publications, some of my publications include African Roots, Brazilian Rights, Cultural and National Identity, Transnational Thrills in the Africana World, and Transnational Africana Women's Writers. So I think we're going to edit now who our order of presenters. So I think, Felix, you were the first first bio I read, okay? So I'm going to ask you to, be the first person, and Professor Afolabi, I'm going to ask you to be the second person then, okay? So are you?
That's okay.
Okay.
That's
So,
okay by me. Yeah, that's okay.
oh,
Yeah.
That's okay.
yeah. So I will ask you for your 10 minutes.
Okay. So does my time start now?
Your time will start now.
Hello?
Yes,
My time starts now. I didn't get your last whatever. I hope the internet is okay.
you
My
can't hear
time
me?
starts.
Yeah, we're hearing you. Your time has started.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Mhm.
So I know by virtue of knowing virtually everybody on this panel that we all to a certain extent are competent in Yoruba. So I will greet all of us in Yoruba. Ẹ kú ilé o, ẹ káalẹ́ o, ẹ káàsán o, ẹ káàárọ̀ níbikíbi tá a bá wà.
Ẹ káàbọ̀. Ẹ káàbọ̀.
Káàbọ̀.
A kí ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n
Oh,
Professor Niyi Afolabi, who is making this come together. It's indeed a great pleasure to have been invited to discuss this book, one of your many children battered in Brazil, and I mean that with the plural itself. So I don't need to reintroduce myself because I guess the chair of this panel has done just that. I greet Professor Afolabi and my friend and good colleague, Lisa here Castillo, who I hope is on this, listening to this, because we've been discussing for the past 1 hour, trying to see when are we going to start. And, you know, but we know we are in a very perilous waters when we are doing these Zoom encounters because Ogun and Eshu, who own the airwaves, would always want to play their own. So I had to mentally remember to give them their dues so that this will not be foiled altogether. So I will make my own brief because 10 minutes, as you know, is not enough to deal with a material as rich as this. We thank the organizers of this LSA project for giving us this opportunity to engage the author, because it is not always that we have an opportunity like this to engage an author. And within the theory of literature, we know that every reader is also a potential co-author of any work, because the reader will finish his own work, submit it, and publish. And once it's published, it gets out of his hands, and it is the rest is in the hands of those who will be his critics, who will now carry on. And that is why my late mentor, Olabi Babalayayi, would say, gbẹ́nàgbẹ́nà ti gbẹ́ ọ̀nà tiẹ̀ tán, ìyókù kù sọ́wọ́ gbẹ́nugbẹ́nu. So every writer, the moment he submits, or he gets his book published, the manuscript published, he has finished his gbẹ́nàgbẹ́nà work. So the rest will now be in the hands of the gbẹ́nugbẹ́nu like us, who will now be adding or reducing from it, or even taking the liberty to interpret it, or even say what the author does not intend to say. That is part of our privilege as gbẹ́nugbẹ́nu. So we will try and do something. The time is very short, but I will try to be as close as possible. Like I said, it's a pleasure always to read Niyi Afolabi's works. Niyi Afolabi, as you know, is one of the pioneers of Brazilian studies in Nigeria. And people like us are happy to look up to him in that circumstances. So, and well, I'm happy that he has given us this book, which reading from the introduction and from what one could glean from the inside of the book is really what I would call an atypical book, atypical in his arsenal of production. Niyi Afolabi, as we know him, is a literary critic who work very well with literature. We were all trained in comparative African literature in Ile-Ife at OAU, well, it was still University of Ife when people like him passed through. It was when it got to our own young generation that you know what they say, Odori Akai, Akaraba de Gun. So University of Ife became Obafemi Awolowo University, but then we thank God today it is Oba Awon University. Apologies to everybody else. So, and we know that Niyi Afolabi's trail is in comparative literature and cultures, of course, and one will not be surprised that he has come up with a book like this. And well, the few things that I want to say is that having gone through the book in its entirety, we thank the organizers for availing us the opportunity of having our hard copies to work with, because it gives us the opportunity to
Felix, you froze.
Felix?
He's having some conversation with the spirit.
Yeah, it must be. It must be.
N. You are frozen.
I think the spirits have taken him.
He spoke too soon about Ogun and Eshu.
That was it. Oh my.
I'm going to see if we can contact the organizers and see. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if the connection might be his end, because everybody else seems
Yeah,
connected.
I would guess that to be true, Lisa.
Yeah.
It's-
Oh, it's a technical glitch in German.
Okay. Oh, it's in Germany. We don't expect that from
That's
Germany.
right. That's right.
Exactly. That's the
Connection
point.
is
Yeah.
strong in Lagos,
Yeah.
strong in Brazil, obviously vanished in Germany.
That's the problem of making sacrifices out of context. He said he made some sacrifices in Germany. He should have called people in Nigeria to
There
make the
you go.
sacrifices on his behalf.
There you go.
You know?
Or possibly to Brazil.
Or Brazil, you know, that would have
Yeah,
worked.
yeah. What do
You
think?
know, should we continue and then maybe,
He
you
can
know,
pick
put,
up. Yeah.
put Felix in at the very end? So
Yeah,
in the
do
interest
that.
of time?
Good idea.
Okay.
Good idea.
All right. So Professor Afolayan, please, can you,
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
yes,
Well,
this is what I get for taking you out of the slot. Okay. I
Oh,
should
no.
have warned, you should have warned me about this. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I think you are trying to make sure the German problem is solved fast, but it didn't
We know
work.
how the Germans get when they're not
Yeah,
first.
you know, they are so close to the center of war now, so you can't predict what is going on there. Well, thank you, everybody. And I will echo the last speaker by saying welcome to everyone, especially for those who are joining us from Nigeria, but maybe it's actually we that I should say a cabo to us, because the Nigerian people are the hosts. They are the people, we are the one joining them, essentially, because the conference is being held there. So this is it's a pleasure for me to be part of this panel. I've known Professor Afolabi for a very long time, and I'm a bit familiar with his writings and his work. I come into this from my own study of Yoruba religion, Yoruba kingship, and Yoruba history. First of all, let me say this is a monumental work. It's excellently done. It is, I mean, almost every chapter in this book can become a book. I mean, you could turn every chapter in this book into a book. There's no doubt about that. So it's very comprehensive, it's detailed, it's almost like, I mean, of course, this is the result of many years of experience and bringing together so many disciplines, you know, art, history, religion, theater, music, anthropology, language, even philosophy in all the exposition of all the traditions and belief. But because our time is very limited, there's so much to talk about and I have so many points, but I will just probably focus on maybe 3 or 4 points that I can comment on in the book. Where I think one of the things that seems very prevalent in the book that I see is this struggle. I don't know whether it's by the author or by the people, the scholars who have been studying this, because this is a synthesis of a lot of works that have been done on this subject. In addition to what you have collected over the years, is this struggle to try to reconcile contradictions, you know, this struggle with hybridization, you know, a lot of, to resolve complexities. It's just, it ran throughout the whole book and you grapple with it almost everywhere. Sometimes you will try to see whether you could explain it, you could break it up. But I think ultimately, the essence of syncretism is that you cannot really resolve these contradictions. That the people themselves, we have to learn to celebrate and rejoice and live and operate in a world of ambiguity and ambivalence. And you made references to this all over the places, but it's almost like you have this effort to disentangle, to separate. We have Condoblé, and then you have the effort of people now trying to say, why don't we take out the Catholic dimension from it? Let's Africanize it. And then you have the re-Africanizations of the 1970s, which is I'm really very curious about. You didn't really explore it much. You are constantly mentioning it and referring to it. But I mean, this book will get to 600 pages if we ask you to do that. But I was fascinated by the idea of re-Africanization. It was supported and backed by the government, by the public. And I would certainly want to actually learn more and read more about this to see what actually happened. How far did it go? How successful was this effort? And is the effort still ongoing or it has already passed? So my thinking is that this state of quagmire, I think you use that phrase in 1 or 2 places, has to be permitted to continue. And people have to see it as it is. I don't think what you have as Condoblé, that integrated Catholicism and African tradition, is essentially a new religion that has come out. And we know it came out of an atmosphere where people had to pretend, had to camouflage, had to do subterfuge in order to be able to smuggle in the Africanness into the acceptable by the majority population. But it's taken a life of its own. And I'm not sure disentangling it and tearing it apart, you are going to create a different religion from what is Condoblé. It's not going to be Condoblé that will come out by the time you finish that process. So this is one point. It also has to do with the issue of purity and authenticity, which came up again and again. That I also think this how will I call it, craze for authenticity. Maybe it's too strong for me to say it is misplaced. You know, whatever you have, whatever has been created over the century is authentic. It is authentic as it is, with all its component parts and all its richness from different multiple traditions. That is authentic. So, I mean, I think I can understand a little why there is this struggle to be distinct or to have a tradition that you can say, what has emerged here, it's not just African religion. It's a new form of religion in America, inspired, rooted in Africa, but it has developed in a different environment. The worship of Shango of Orisha, the way it is being carried out here, is not exactly the same the way people are carrying them out in Yoruba land. They are similar, they are connected, but they have taken a life of their own in this place. Well, it's also like it's difficult for me not to comment on Pervaga, which you brought out, especially it's a controversy with Wole Soyinka. I've had hints of these things, but this is the first time I'll be reading this into detail. And you happen to be in the place when this was happening. And remember, you are wondering, what am I doing here? Am I trapped in this place? You are part of the story. If you don't know, you are actually part of the story. You're also making that history in the process because you are translating the work. I mean, it's a kind of opportune movement, historic movement for you. And I think that vantage position that has allowed you to be able to examine these things. So, I mean, I have 2 points there. One, of course, is Soyinka, that you are kind of a little, how will I call it? You are very careful when you are dealing with Soyinka, which is understandable. And it's you struggle very hard to find words how to present him. It was clear you are critical of him, but you didn't want to appear too critical of him, for all kinds of reasons. Soyinka is a maverick. He's a kind of troublemaker. He's always inserting himself in trouble. Can you imagine the kind of guerrilla system he used to go and take those things, even though he has not admitted that he sees them? But I won't be surprised. I mean, this was a guy who went and took over the radio station in the 1960s and stopped. So he's always been a rebel. So it's not out of character that he could have done this. But I'm grateful for the insight and the way you brought this out of your reservoir, your memory archive to really engage it. We hope Soyinka will eventually write a memoir, maybe post rumors that we probably admit, this kind of vigilante guerrilla scholarship that he did. Well, now on Vaga, this is on talking about the medicine, the preservation of Yoruba medicine. There's a lot to say there, but maybe I should just leave that and move on to something else because I know time may not be on my side. But let's see. This issue of preserving African culture or African tradition or African medicine is a big problem. People sometimes who are scholars who are Yoruba scholars who are studying the Yoruba diaspora, especially religion, always make the statement that if the Yoruba religion has a future, it may actually be in the Americas. You didn't engage that, or at least I didn't come across it. You dealt with this issue of Ewe and the plants. The fact that we don't have many of these things may not even be available again today. And that of Yoruba heritage is now in the New World, preserved in Brazil, in Bahia, in a way that you may not even be able to find in many parts of Yoruba land. So I wonder what your take is on that area. And then let me just talk about probably two more things because time may be gone here. Let me start with the issue of the carnivores. The chapter 9, where you talk about the carnivores, and very fascinating chapter in every sense of the term. But you are very cynical in your conclusion. And I don't know whether this is your conclusion or this is your summary of what people are reflecting about. As a fair term, or whether the people to a kind of psychological empowerment. And I think it's correct. It's a psychological empowerment. These festivals, these carnivals, it fulfills that role. And that's a legitimate role for it to fulfill. You also describe it as a negotiated or syncretic cultural redemption, which I think is also true. But then you went on to say that it's a temporary measure which only defers social trauma of marginality until after each carnival event. Yeah, that is sober. It's sad, but true that this is the reality. But I think it is more than that from what you have written and from many things you have said. Yeah, it may be negotiated, but I think it is all part of the struggle. You know, this is part of the struggle. Progress is always incremental. This little progress. And this one, you know, what is happening here is changing public perception and attitude. You know, giving legitimacy to the sources of these displays. The carnivals, they don't only talk about the carnival. They are also talking about the religion that created them. They are validating those religions. You know, they are giving legitimacy to the sources of this display and what the carnival represented. If the carnivals are so beautiful and so alluring and so desirable and so popular and so acceptable and legitimate, and now receiving world recognition and affirmation, you know, I think that is the point of the carnival. They are not just to entertain, they do that, but they are also validating legitimizing the source of those things. So I just thought this was a little bit, you are too, how will I call it? Whether you too reflective, which is fine, but also a little pessimistic, or rather maybe cynical about it. I may be attributing that to you, but that may not be true. So the last point has to do with maybe the last point. In the chapter where you talk about the two plays by Nascimento, Nascimento's Sortilegio, and the play by Rodriguez, Anjo Negro. Very fascinating. It's a very difficult chapter, not because of the way it was written, but because of the story. You know, it's a very painful chapter to read, but very important chapter because it deals with this key word that ran throughout the whole story, miscegenation. You know, miscegenation not just of races, but of culture, of religion, of tradition. Condoble, Afro, everything is about miscegenation. But unfortunately, it's very tragic. Very tragic. They all ended up in murder, in assassination, in rape, in incest. And what is this telling us? Is this telling us that every attempt to reconcile, to come together, you know, is the old experience is telling us that you can neither be here nor there. You can't be both black and white. You know, you cannot be both. There's no middle road here, no compromise. These people tried to compromise. They failed. They ended up in tragedy. So you describe it as a kind of, how did you call it? You said the extermination of the miscegenation theory. They both say there's no road there. And the choruses in these two places were constantly saying, you can't be. She wanted to be white. That was a mistake. There's no way you can ever be white. You cannot be both, you know? And it is, race is fate. It is destiny. You can't change it. No one escapes a color. This is the message. That is impossible. That kind of message is difficult, is problematic. You know, it's going to expose the people to trauma, and they went through trauma. So if you to deny the possibility of a middle ground, of a compromise, and to basically take centuries of engagement and miscegenation, racial and cultural, and nullify it, is setting everybody up for failure. You know, because he's saying the temptation is always too strong to see this as a way out, as a middle road. But the lesson from this play is that you do not go there. There's no answer. That's not the road. That's tough. You know, is this very dominant in Brazilian literature? Is this the general perspective? I don't want to think so, because it seems to run contrary to everything. Okay, and then finally, this is finally
Professor,
now.
we have to.
Okay, this is finally. This one is very light. Now, this is one of the critics in your book. You know, the thing is that this is a book of 360 something pages. One of your writers, Sari, I don't know whether you criticized that or you are just reporting her, said it was against the display of monuments, the way African Yoruba deities, African deities, because they are too simplistic and they are kind of, they homogenize and they take them out of their cultural context. And you basically allow her to get away with it. You didn't, you just reported it and left it there. I mean, why can we, this is another, for the people who are putting this display. I mean, I've been to Brazil before, not as many times as you have done. And it's incredible. You see all these monuments, you know, the Iemanjas and in those places. I mean, look at Iemanjá in Copacabana, right there. And then the dancing deities who are dancing upon the water. In a society.
Professor, I really have to ask you to wind up.
Okay, so
Okay.
my question is very simple. The people, this is a very important way of taking over the public space. And Africans should also do the same. This book, with all the 65,000 pictures of Vaga, has no picture. Why? No picture, no illustration in all these incredible, beautiful, wonderful, colorful descriptions that we have done. Is it the publisher or is it the author? Or both? Thank you, sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we now move to Dr. Castillo, okay?
Chair, hello?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I sent a message. My internet just went down.
Yes.
So-
You know, I sent back a message that we will just move you towards the end of the program, unfortunately, Felix, you know?
Okay, no problem.
Yeah,
No problem.
you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm good. Okay, I just
All
wanted
right.
to know.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, yeah.
Good afternoon,
Lisa.
everyone in Nigeria. Good morning, everyone else. It's very much of a pleasure to be participating in this panel of the Lagos Studies Association, which I really, really admire in terms of its unwavering efforts to connect scholars in the diaspora with scholars in Nigeria and to bridge these geopolitical, how can I say, inequalities of power and dissemination of scholarly knowledge that is so often a problem. And so it's really a very great pleasure to be participating from Brazil on this panel. I am a scholar of Candomblé, and my work deals in part with the rituals, but also very much in terms of how Candomblé arose from a long history of exchanges across the Atlantic. And so what I'm going to be focusing on in my remarks is the question of relocation, which is in the title of the book, and which, according to what Professor Afolabi tells us in the book, it has two aspects. One is the forcible removal from Africa of the enslaved people who arrived in the Americas. And the second is the affirmation of Afro-spiritual identity through negotiations with hybridity, cultural identity, and self-preservation. As somebody who works on Candomblé, it's really dealing with the question of hybridity is inescapable, because as Professor Afolabi remarked, Candomblé is embedded, it sprung from African beliefs and practices, but it was transformed during the diaspora. And this is one of during the history, its history in the diaspora. And this is one of the things that's addressed in the book. And this is something that has been dealt with by other scholars. The chair of this panel included, Felix included. I haven't really dealt with this question of hybridity myself, but there's a big body of work on this subject. And I think one of the excellent points made in the book is that it allies itself with a body of scholarship that challenges conventional dichotomies between, on the one hand, supposed purity of the practices of the people who crossed the Atlantic in the hold of slave ships, and on the other hand, the transformations that occurred over time. The issue is often in, I think, conventional scholarship, the existence of these hybridities or transformations or metamorphoses or whatever you want to call them have been viewed as defects, a response to the inescapable, cruel reality of no longer having contact with people in Africa, of dealing with a hostile environment in the New World, adapting to the hegemonic position of Catholicism in the case of Latin America and Brazil specifically. I want to, for those who may not be acquainted with syncretism, as it's often called, I want to explain, give a little bit of background. It involves associations, parallels, and equivalencies between Afro-Brazilian deities and the saints of the Catholic pantheon. Catholicism is not monotheism. There are hundreds of saints in Catholicism, just as there are hundreds of deities for the Yoruba. And so in the context of the New World, in the Catholic countries, associations were made between the Catholic deities, the characteristics, their personalities, and the personalities that were attributed to the Yoruba deities. In Brazil and Cuba, I say Yoruba because in Brazil and also in Cuba, which were the last two countries to abolish the slave trade, and the slave trade continued through the middle of the 19th century, they received a huge influx of Yoruba-speaking people because, for many reasons, one being the wars that were then happening in the Yoruba territories, which resulted in people being sold into Atlantic slavery. So in the book, Professor Afolabi examines cultural manifestations in which these contact zones between Catholicism and Candomblé are evident, such as street festivals, and as Professor Afolabi mentioned, carnival, and also popular music, literature, and other forms. And he is emphatic in challenging the idea that the juxtaposition of Afro-Brazilian and Catholic rites in secular spaces, such as street festivals, necessarily involves a profanation of the sacred. He reminds us that the sacred and the profane are not mutually exclusive. They can and do coexist and even overlap. On page 39, he says, the secularization of the sacred is, and I cut out a little clause, but I hope I didn't remove the intent, the author's intent. The secularization of the sacred is the agency that popularizes the sacred in the daily or festive life of the people. And I can think of some excellent examples from my own experience. Today, Yoruba is no longer spoken in day-to-day life. And even for people in the Candomblé temples, it's often an effort to learn the words to the chants, the orikis, and other elements of the Yoruba language that are fundamental. And it's really outstanding when you notice that some of these songs, the chants, which have been excerpted and used in songs that are popularized by recordings. And I'm not talking just about strict recordings of Candomblé chants, but popular music songs that make quotations of these chants and that are played on the radio. They're played during Carnival, not just by the Afro-Brazilian groups, but also by the groups that involve mostly white people. And these songs, when you go to the Candomblé houses, you notice that everybody in the audience and the people of the Terreiro, of the temple, they are all singing along. So this kind of cross-fertilization between sacred material that goes into the secular domain and then comes back into the sacred space, revitalized. It's a very interesting phenomenon. And this is one of the reasons I think that Professor Afolabi embraces the Bahian government's inclusion of candomblé as a pillar of cultural tourism, as well as the mixture of Afro-Brazilian and religious and Catholic elements in street festivals.
Lisa, I'm giving you a 3-minute countdown.
Really? Oh my
Yep.
God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we have too many more people now. Okay.
Okay. I
Mhm.
think I'm going to unfortunately have to skip some of the things that I plan to say, but I want to focus now on an aspect of the book that I think is it's present in the book, but wasn't necessarily verbalized or addressed explicitly in the book. And what I'm talking about in terms of this is the dynamic between Africa and Brazil that continued after the end of the slave trade. It was the agency, the protagonism came from people who had purchased their freedom from slavery and later returned to Africa. Some of these people were candomblé priests and were ancestral figures in the oldest houses of candomblé today. And they left descendants, in some cases, in Africa too. The Bangboche Martins family of Lagos is an excellent example. There's also a family in Ouida, the Vidyasa family, which was founded by the husband of the founding priestess of what is often considered Brazil's oldest temple. So it's important to understand, I think, that this is a third kind of relocation. It didn't end necessarily, even though these people were a minority, they exerted an important influence. And this is something that I have examined in my own work. It's also been examined in the work of scholars like Laurent Maturi. And I think it's really fundamental. And I also think, in a certain way, that this, although the movement of Agudas essentially began to grind to a halt in the first decades of the 20th century, it was later reinvigorated by scholars such as Pierre Verger. Pierre Verger, in fact, was tireless in Brazil in seeking to introduce the teaching of Yoruba at the university in Bahia, and seeking out people in Nigeria who could come to teach that course. He also was instrumental in forming a pilot program, which involved the exchange of scholars between Bahia and West Africa, from senior scholars to students. And I believe, actually, that your own arrival in Bahia in the early 1980s, in a certain way, is an outgrowth of these exchanges. And in the second chapter, when you discuss the Ori Olokun incident, which involved Olabi, who was then teaching Yoruba at the university in Bahia through this very program that Verger had argued for the introduction of, he was in Bahia because of this. And then returned to Nigeria, where he spoke to Soyinka, and the two of them developed the idea then of returning to Bahia to repatriate what they believed was an original Ori Olokun. And this is actually something that Soyinka deals with in one of his autobiographies, a memoir. I forget the title, but it came out, I think, about 10 years ago. And it's interesting because in this, he recognizes that they were mistaken in believing and thinking that it was an original sculpture. And
you
when
must
they arrived
set forth at dawn, I think. You must
arrived
set forth at dawn.
Yes, it's that one.
That's it.
Yes.
When they arrived in Dakar, having removed the sculpture, not from Pierre Verger's home, but the home of another person who was a friend of Verger's, the artist Kadibé, who you mentioned a few times in the book, they removed the sculpture from Kadibé's home, got to Dakar, and then looked at the bottom, and it was stamped, Replica, British Museum. So anyway, this is something that is, I think it's an interesting backdrop for the back and forth movement and the hybridities that you mentioned. And it's something that I think when you get your second edition of this book, it will be an interesting thing to add to the discussion. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
And
you
I'm
too.
looking forward to
Thank
hearing
you.
the other contributions.
Okay, so we'll move on to Professor Akin Otiko, please, and we are going to stick to our 10 minutes because we will not have time to hear from our author if we do not, okay? All right?
All right, so thank you very much. I speak very close to the venue of the conference. I actually didn't know there would be some audience that would have stayed there. So nice. Thank you, the author. It's nice to have you here, Professor Niyi Afolabi. As a good read, the book is a good read, and I'm very delighted that I'm on this panel. I understand the conflict that you expressed in the book. I'm a Catholic priest, and I write and reflect on the religion of the Yorubas. And I love the religion of Yorubas. So I know what tension you're talking about. I just want to say two things. Two things that I see run through the whole book. The two things I'm going to be speaking to. One is the concept of relocating, and the other one is the hybridity. So I understand the idea of relocating the sense of sacredness. Because there is no question as to the beginnings of Yoruba sacred space, and because there also are no disputes as to the linkage that Brazil has to what I call home, Yoruba land, I would have preferred, if I were to be the author, I would have preferred the concept of extension rather than relocating. So rather than relocate the sacredness, you just do an extension, because historically you know that where it all started, and then you also have the link that is not broken. The way Claudia in the introduction, the way Claudia and Sasiha described it, that a sacred space does not exist a priori, but as the outcome of actions, intentions, and recollection. So yes, Salvador de Bahia has all of this. It's got the actions, it's got the recollection, it's got the intention. And so there's no big contention as to whether it has taken over the Yoruba sacred space. I love a lot of what Professor Afolabi said with regards to the religion now taking an identity of its own. And I think that's one way to resolve a lot of the contention, the tension that exists there. They want to you're trying to make it keep the Afrocentric identity, whereas the Brazilian identity is very visible. I think one of the things I teach my students and I make them think about is every religion has got its context, every religion has got a name. And I think the space in Brazil should begin to think of a true identity for the religion and maybe a name. And I don't think they're going to be betraying the Yoruba sacred space by saying, oh, what we have is this. It is like what you have the Yoruba sacred space. But what we have here is this, because it has a nature, because it has a history, and of course, the politics in Brazil cannot be taken away. So these very important elements are very, very things that define the nature of the religion you find in Brazil. I totally understand the fact that the people are not comfortable with the fact that it has to be hidden under the Catholicism names and all of that. But those are the things that have actually given it its character. So I think what you have done that runs through all, I wouldn't try to discuss each of the chapters, but what you have done that runs through all of the chapters is the hybridization that you have talked about. And I think that in itself is what gives the character. A lot more work has been done with regards to what is done in the sacred space in Brazil. And what we have here, I mean, I'm in an Institute of African Diaspora Studies that would try these days to bring about not a blend, but to clearly make that distinction. And in order to be able to say, oh, this is the character that this one has, and this is the character that this one has taken. That something has taken up a character doesn't make it inferior. It may come, historically speaking, after something, but it has taken its character. And I think it's time for the religion and the sacred space in Brazil to begin to define itself. That way, they will not feel the pressure of that history of slavery. That way, they won't have the pressure of still thinking, I'm not what it is like in Africa, and I'm here, they're not letting me be who I want to be. I think we should define that space and truly give it its character. What we have in Yoruba religion is evolving by the day. I mean, you know, even here in the Yoruba land, you still have things that you would love to do, but you no longer can do for different reasons. I mean, you have urbanization, you have education. So the religion is evolving. I mean, if you do not have what you really would like to use for the religion, then you adapt some things. So religion is evolving, and God is still manifesting himself. God is still manifesting himself in the way that he wants. I think we need to begin to think of what, in a Catholic sense, what we have called the rubrics of liturgy, what the man-made parts, how we have seen it, how we have interpreted it, and how we have imposed things on it. God has his own way of expressing himself. And I think I see a lot more vibrancy, a lot more commitment, even in Brazil these days, where we begin to talk about the religion of the Africans. I'm just going to come close to conclusion by saying that the space in Brazil must begin to define itself. We should come up with a name for it. It does not have to be Afro-Brazilian religion. It should have a name of itself that defines itself, and it should not be seen as something that is not as good as what it is. Talking about Carnival, I'd like to know what happens after Carnival. If you speak from the space in Africa, Carnival doesn't start with what you see. Carnival is close to the end product of what had taken place. So in your description of Carnival, just like that it's a hybrid religious culture, is reduced to consumable symbols. I mean, I think Carnival in itself is beyond consumable symbols. That's what I will think, because there's so much that goes into it. What we now see is the product of, and when that is over, it is not over, because those that are engaged in it know that it's not over. I just want to conclude by asking you what happens with the distinction you're trying to make between Euro-Brazilian and Afro-Brazilian identities. And that is where hybridity comes in. So rather than speak Euro-Brazilian or Afro-Brazilian, I think we should speak to the identity that exists. In all, let me just say that it's a good read. I can tell you that I have chapters that my students are going to be summarizing for their next semester. Thank you very much for the book.
Okay, thank you very much. So we move on to now Scott, Professor Barton, okay? Mute.
Sorry. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, etc. to everyone. Thanks again to LSA and this committee for including me on this panel. having presented here last year, I too appreciate and echo Dr. Castillo's comments about the necessity and import of LSA in this international, cross-cultural, interreligious discourse. We'll try to edit for interest of time. Briefly, a year ago around this time, I was in a lecture, graduate seminar at Friends University, and I spoke about Maranhense folklore, syncretism, tambor Jimina, Catholic and Jewish religious traditions. And my host, after we had the lecture, said, "Do you think syncretism is still important?" And I said, well, I think it's part of a deeper argument that, at least on this side of the Atlantic, is still very salient and has already been said. Many people have discussed, and I can look back to the 70s and 80s, as was referenced, and the famous quote of Maestela Giochosi Acevedo, when she said, "I'm not against the Catholic Church, but against syncretism," which dovetails with Haitian sociologist Laïnik Hubron's statement, and I quote, "Paradoxically, the more vigorous the movement's effort to safeguard Vaudou's original purity, and the more it is influenced by Christian ecclesiastical models," end quote. And also to Paul C. Johnson's question or problematization of the Protestantization of Candomblé as a means to represent itself as a coherent set of beliefs considered to be a bona fide religion. And so these discourses, as with other theorists have been mentioned, put into question this idea of syncretism, syncretization, and the Africanization, re-Africanization along the lines of an engagement with or absorption of another social group's ethos, dogma, and spiritual epistemologies on the continent. But also within the work that I had done for that presentation, I was looking at pre-contact syncretization within West African construct, where this idea of absorbing or benefiting from your enemy or your oppositional knowledge to better yourself is something that happens before the arrival of the European, and the concept of the sublimated enslaved hiding beneath Catholic practice, which is what I think Maestela, among others, was railing against. And we get from this time in the 70s and 80s to the present day that we see in this book, this question of how do we position what I would prefer to call the evolution of these traditions. I don't particularly like the term hybridity, particularly when we think about Homi Bhabha and this idea of the etymology of the word. So I prefer the evolution of the tradition. And so I think that this book questions the liminality of sacred and profane cultural production in a good way, and it reaffirms the need for scholars to research and inquire along these themes that has been relevant and is relevant both in the diaspora and on the continent. And I think that we need to see, or one of the things I see in this book briefly is this intersection of the sacred and the profane from, he doesn't talk about Bantu, but the Bantu, Yoruba, and Catholic registers. There's an endemic problematic that almost was begun in the beginning of this panel that separates the continental dogma, which allows for a blurring of the binary, as opposed to the Catholic perspective that reifies it. The idea when we first started about talking about Eshu and his role in these situations changes the way we look at the relationship between the sacred and the profane, in short. A few things I appreciate about this book very much were his thorough engagement with the literary criticism, theater, the world of the theater, comparative literature, and the work on festivals, carnival, and blocos. In these areas, the scaffolding and footing was quite secure. Overall, there was a strong attempt to engage each theme through a variety of multidisciplinary source material, which, as somebody who's a food scholar, so I inherently am trans, multi, or interdisciplinary, I responded to. And I too appreciate the engagement with questions of the evolution of these traditions. And from this, I will begin. In the interest of time, my comments are going to only be focused on chapter 10, with its tongue-in-cheek, quasi-syncretic title, Give Us This Day Our Daily Akarajé, thereby melding Matthew 6:11-13 with black-eyed pea fritters, the bready culinary cultural transfer of foodstuff, ever popular in a region where colonially wheat did not easily grow to provide the essential European vehicle for the sacrament. Please excuse me if, as being a US born and somebody focused on Brazil, I misstep on some Yoruba land traditions, and I would love to be corrected if I make a misstep. In the introduction, you talk about relocation and commercialization of traditional sacred foodways, and continue to engage with what that signifies, that looks at this comparative analytics between acarajé as a hybridized culinary item available within Brazilian cuisine. I point to another Soyinka passage from his memoir Ake, The Years of Childhood, from page 153, and I quote, for there they all were together, the jogi seller who passed in full lyrical cry beneath the backyard wall at a regular hour of the morning, followed only moments later by the akara seller, her fried bean cake still surreptitiously oozing and perfuming the air with groundnut oil. As I understand it, and this is where I ask for correction, groundnut or peanut oil, vegetable and palm oils are alternative used for these fritters. I believe that uniquely the Ijesa in the dish akara osu in southwestern Nigeria already specifies palm oil in its recipe. And like akara completo in Brazil, that is stuffed with small shrimp, these akara osu are served stuffed with crayfish. I raise this question of oil and the preparation of the quote-unquote sandwiching of bean fritter as it relates to the sacredness of palm oil in a Brazilian context, as an interlocutor between the profane and divine worlds. These references for production of akara, as I understand them in a Nigerian or Yoruba context, relate to celebratory moments or rites of passage and reaching a certain age or a momentous occasion, as noted by the author. The ubiquity and circulation of the fritter is well known, and as Nina Bitar, he cites, illustrated, exists outside the Northeast, and her work is situated in Rio de Janeiro. And having participated in the census for the Baianas de Acarajé, we know that they exist way beyond Bahia itself. Similarly, the story of Bolinhos de Jesus has become widespread, as he identifies, yet their case went to the Supreme Court, and then the evangelicals lost their claim, which is significant. And as Lisa specified, I would include that in a second edition, because though we do see the evidence of the Bolinhos attempt to circulate those, they do not have a leg to stand on. I do know that they continue to attempt to desacralize acarajé by changing the name, recipe, and cooking medium, since there is some understanding that the palm oil in and of itself has an agency or power. I would like to hear more about how you define it as a blaxploited product. I'm also intrigued to hear more about the inevitable commercialization that you have referred to. I'm not sure that I concur with how you define it as blaxploited, but I'd like to hear your perspective. For my prior work, the average wage or income earned by the Baianas, with the exception of the highly marketed products of a seller like Gina, who you reference in her biography, does not easily support their families or given them a financial cushion, which was the rationale for Michel Temer's attempted bait and switch in categorizing the Baianas as an occupation during his 2018 presidential run to try to get their votes. And that categorization came 300 or 400 years after they had been working in the streets. So on paper, they have a leg to stand on and some security within the economic system and healthcare and retirement, but that's not really true in reality. So this question of hyper commercialization or blaxploitation, I think becomes another problematic. Whereas the fritter has a cachet in popular culture, its role in sacred rites is still clear, and its perception is predicated on the subjectivities of the purchaser. Foreign tourists, or even Brazilians from southern Brazil, do not always understand the semiotics of the fritter as nordestinos do, whether or not they follow candomblé or umbanda. And so I think there's a layering in the perception and identity understanding of the fritter itself. What I've noticed in the exploitation of foodstuffs occurs most consistently on the corporate mass-produced level that we see throughout the country with items such as pão de queijo, sometimes acarajé, coxinha de frango, and bolinhos de bacalhau that appear in airport terminals and in kind of mass-produced, able to buy from industrial food producers. This is distinct from those same items made by small independent business locations or vended as street foods. You make a point of the citation UNESCO, recognizing it as a product of immaterial culture. I'm not aware of that, and so I'm curious about that citation. I know that IPAC and IFAN, the State and Federal Institute for Cultural Heritage and Patrimony, have both included acarajé in the Libro de Saberes, or the Books of Knowledge, and that in UNESCO's files, they don't list anything prior to 2008. So if in fact they did register, it's not easily found. Whereas I know that in IFAN, in Book 1, Decree 3551 on August 4th, 2000, identifies it as, and I quote, "It is the traditional practice, production, and sale of on a tabulero of the foods identified as comidas de Baiana or Bahian foods made with dende palm oil and linked to the cults of the Orisha that is widely disseminated in the city of Salvador, Bahia. Highlights of these comida Baianas include acarajé, etc., whose recipe has origins in the Gulf of Benin and has brought to this region by enslaved West Africans dedicated to the cults of Shango and Oya or Yansan," end quote. And 2012, Ipaki also registered this following the dictates of Ifan. And so this is, all of them are significant. And if in fact, UNESCO has certified them, I'd like to know, because it's very significant to me as well. Also, I thought it was germane that you included the reference to FIFA. I would also add the fact that you reference the import of the Baianas beating FIFA, but it's not just on a state or federal level. This is the first time globally that any entity of a folkloric or community-based group is able to beat a global or multinational corporation. Because we remember, FIFA came out and control the all things FIFA during the 2 years of the Copa de Confederações and the World Cup.
Scott, we have to start winding. We have to start winding.
Okay. I'm gonna. And yes, I think there's, in working with Vivaldo da Costa Lima, he railed against the acarajé completo. He preferred the tradition of just the molho pimenta or hot sauce in a split acarajé. I'm not sure that I concur that you referenced it to McDonald's. And I would argue from a nutritional standpoint, you have a much better product by adding vegetables, etc. And finally, the conclusion of this chapter that leans into blanquimentação of Brazilian nordestino culture seems questionable to me. I'd like to know more about that, in part due to the evolution of the politics of identity following the demographic shift evidenced in the 2010 census, which then puts Black people that kind of already known to be dominant, they give them a certain greater agency. And even as fetish, the desire to experience Afro-Brazilian culture seems ever present, not in decline. So I'm curious to hear more of your position or untangling some of the things that you really bring to the fore in this book that has so much to recommend it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. And now we can, kind of double back to Professor Omidiri, okay?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm here.
All right, wonderful.
Thank you very much. I'm glad actually that I had to come at this time. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. I'm glad that this is the time I have to come, because actually, I mentioned something in passing that somebody needs to give a galo to a shulalu. And I really mean it seriously, because a few of the things that have happened in this past 2 hours have shown me that my brother Afolabi really needs to have a conversation with a shulalu whenever you can. Now that we have listened, it's a privilege for me to have been able to listen to everybody, because there are some things I had set out to say from the beginning, but I was a bit careful because I would not want my speech to influence what others might say. So, but Ishulalu reconfigured everything in the best way. So I can now focus on a few things. And I trust also, like I told you, Afolabi is my brother. And like we say in Brazil, I feel free to give him a puxada de orelha, because in this work, there are a few things that one needs to point out. And I'm glad that people like Scott Afolabi has mentioned that, Professor Funsho Afolayan mentioned a few, Professor Kyochikotu and Lisa. So I'm sure many of the things I'm saying will not be new. In order to save time, I wanted to engage with the title from the beginning, because relocating the sacred, African divinities and Brazilian cultural hybridities, for me, from the title, hides a lot of what one would meet in the book. There is no reference there to the Orisha that seem to have been the focus, the interest that our author here is talking about. So I would have preferred Relocating the Sacred, African Orisha, and Brazilian Cultural Hybridity. That would have captured what you want very well, although even that your choice is symptomatic of a few things as far as I can read into this work. But first, let me quickly say the things I like about this work is, as usual, that Niyi Afolabi has shown, you know, that kind of serious training we have in comparative literature from old University of Ife. You can see the volume, the number, the sheer gross number of books that he engaged with, of materials he engaged with, is quite impressive. I love that about the work, and I really am happy, and I'm sure many are students of literature and literary culture would enjoy, you know, and will glean a lot from that. And also, I enjoy your discussion on Abdias Nascimento, just like Aki Ochiko said, your discussion on Abdias Nascimento's sortilégio and the Anjo Negro angle. Well, I enjoy that. That's a great thing. But now, on the whole, of course, we are in the age of interdisciplinarity, and we know that cultural studies is the in thing. We all do it ourselves, and we enjoy it. But there are some fundamentals that would make it real, so that it doesn't look folkloric at the level of scholarship. And I found that this book particularly, just like I'm sure many of the others on this panel have said, would have benefited from people in the area on ground, because there are a lot of mix-up that you have brought up here in this work. You know, of course, you confess right from the beginning that you are not familiar with. You started off as a completely green person on it when you first went to Brazil in when you first met Mike Stella in 86, and that apparently since then you really have not been able to come to grips with many of the things, and that's why one sees a lot of mix-up in what you have come up with, because just like Prosaki Ochiko said, the impression you gave that the Afro-Brazilians in their religious tradition are yet to come to terms with the identity is really not exact. If you engage with people who are really involved in Afro-Brazilian religion, they feel comfortable about who they are. In fact, many of them will feel so comfortable, they would want to actually teach the Africans what Orisha religion should be about. So that point you really need to get back on it. It's really not the case at all. And of course, since you have confessed yourself that you are not into the Orisha tradition, that you don't understand it, one will forgive a lot of here and there errors that you put, like in your page 91, where you call Omolu Odedudu. Omolu is not Odedudu any less. Odedudu, not even Oshos is Odedudu, although in Brazil they call him Ode, but it's not Odedudu. Odedudu is specifically Erinle. And of course, on a lighter material, though not so light, because you raised something. I lost transmission briefly towards the end of Lisa's production. I was thinking maybe she would touch on that. Your discussion of Vege and Soyinka is really a very deeper, it's a lot deeper issue than you have made of it, and you actually confounded so many things. Of course, you based it on the claim that you had some first-hand suggestive conversation with Pierre Verger, but actually there are a lot of things that just will not fix into that. I may advise that you read Soyinka's You Must Set Forth at Dawn. He mentioned the episode specifically in it, and my own book too. I actually spoke about it too, because just like you had some things in Brazil, I had a few things too, and I followed it up. And I actually mentioned it in my book, Yoruba Yanidadi. So which I'm sure you know, because you prefaced, you wrote one of the blogs. So anyway, that is that, but you need to look into that. The aspects that actually I would like to say, because of time, is the issue of translation. This book suffers also grossly from the problem of translation. You mentioned it when we are engaging with Pierre Verger's work on Away and what you did. And of course, we know how difficult translation could be, especially when you are translating materials as deep as religious traditional materials that we have here. But some of the things, because at the point I was asking myself, because, well, one of the things that I take up with people in the US each time I'm discussing literature and things with them is that they have so much anglicized everything that they will not show us the original that they are translating from. They will just transfer everything into English for you to read, whereas we know a lot of things is lost. So if you had given us some insight and some of the copies of the original that you were translating from, maybe it would have saved us a lot of a few embarrassing moments about the translations we have. I have actually listed quite a number of things that I would have loved to engage with, but I don't think I have much time. But specifically, because you touched in your chapter on Odu, your chapter 8 on Cleomatins and Sinai, where you chose to talk about Odu. Well, I am not being judgmental here. I wonder how you come to actually associate Claire Martin's work with Odu in the first place, because I really think there is a lot to be questioned there. But then you went into some exegesis that are completely out of mark. So, and I would have expected that you would have found somebody to revise, some of those things, when you are talking about Igbodu, trying to do exegesis on Igbodu, and you mix up so many things. Igbodu is different from Odu itself, and then let me see. I'm looking directly here at. Let me just take your concluding part on that page 214, where you are talking about from this day on, no Babalawo diviner is complete without seeing Odu. He who has no Odu will not be able to consult Ifa. That is completely, out of mark completely. And such Babalawo who is initiated without this ritual is called Elegan. Yes, you are correct. Our Elegan is somebody who did not do the part of Odu in it, but that does not mean he cannot consult Ifa. Then he will not be able to manipulate any sacred object of Ifa for divination. That is wrong. Many inspiring diviners went to Nigeria and ended up as Elegan. That part, I have a feeling that you're actually reporting on something you read from somebody, and for those of us who have been engaged in this back and forth discussion with about re-Africanization, usually with Ifa from the Cuban roots and everything, we will understand this a lot more. And so the confusion that emanates from this, I think you got it from your source there. So, well, I would not be able to.
Felix, I'm sorry, we only will have 3 minutes, unfortunately. That's our problem. Okay.
Anyway, let me just stop here so that we can have some discussion, because of course we want to hear our man too. After all, it's because of you that we are here today. So I think I will leave the space for you, my brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Chair.
much. Thank you. Okay. And we'll open the door to Niyi. And a question I wanted to ask you, Niyi, before we, is who reviewed the book for you? And who did the publisher send the book to? Because, we are some of the experts on these things, and we didn't get we would have been able to help correct some of the issues in the text itself. So this is something that, the publishers could also help, all right? So we open the floor to Niyi. We only have 2 minutes, unfortunately, Niyi. And where is Niyi now?
I'm here.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm not even sure how to start, because
there's so much.
Yeah,
maybe say thank you and later.
I feel so maybe flattered, or I'm humbled as well. I appreciate the depth and the seriousness of of those who engaged the book, I can make an excuse just because of time that this thing came together. First, there was no benefit of ethnography. So I'll start with my own self-criticism. No benefit of ethnography. I kind of, because of COVID and all of that, and you have research money for 3 years, and not that you don't know what to do with the money, but I know if you don't spend it or use it for something, you lose it, and renegotiation becomes a problem. So what I did basically was to travel back to my days of not knowing anything, like an undergrad, when I first went to Brazil. But fortunately also, I do my research in a way where I think ahead, in the sense that I know that might be a time when there is no money. They may just tell you there's no money just to irritate you. So you have to walk ahead, maybe 2-3 steps ahead. So at times I start writing things. I mean, I'll have an agenda. I'll have what do you call it? A proposal, yeah. But it's almost as if I'm doing meta criticism, if that makes sense. So you want to write about Candomblé, but you only went to Candomblé once or twice. Just like we go to Brazil for weeks, we come back, maybe most 2 months, we critique, the other for doing the same thing. But at times when we don't have a choice, we do the same thing, just to survive. And then later on, if you have better opportunity, a better place, then you can actually do it right. Maybe an anthropologist will not do it the way I did. I did it as, okay, I've written some things, I had an agenda, but something is missing here, which is the few steps or many steps that you all highlighted. Checking. I can't answer the question about who they send them to, because you know how it is getting who to do things. Even when you suggest it, you may not go to that person. So yes, I have so many things here, but I don't know if I'm going to say anything right here. But what I feel good about is the seriousness of the engagement. I wasn't expecting. Not I wasn't expecting it. I'm not sure, but I'm impressed because I'm listening and I feel like I'm in a seminar really, because everyone that spoke, they spoke not just about the book, but about the way to do research, about the future, about what they agree or not agree about. So I would just try to see what I can remember from memory. So one was Reafricanization, syncretism, of course. Now let me say what happened with DJ when I was struggling, with many things, just left home and I'm trying to figure out my life, my future. And I was working with him, getting paid, of course, weekly. It was good. So, but at the same time, on syncretism, maybe this is the one, it's good to use anecdote at time to explain things. So with the syncretism, we were discussing, I learned a lot from him. We were discussing syncretism. I think I use it loosely because I was maybe 20, 21, something like that. Maybe then, maybe something, I was probably early 20s. And when I said syncretism, he said, no, it is not syncretism. It is just a position. So how do we start discussing that? Do you understand? I'm using syncretism that I picked up. Maybe I just had it in Portuguese syncretism, and I never went beyond that as an undergrad. Now I'm back in Brazil in 86, 4 years later, and I mentioned that what I thought I understood what it was. And he said, no, it is not syncretism. It is just a position, meaning the two traditions are coexisting, that they can never merge, which is not my own understanding of syncretism. My understanding of syncretism is two, well, even cultures, you can say that. Two religions came together, two or more came together to create one that is separable, but he says, no, it is just a position. So that is so much to learn for me based on this seminar I just had. Now, Reafricanization of the 70s, it came about, and there's no one explanation to this. It came about because they were doing what we would call going back to the roots. So it's about negritude. So what is good about it is that it was not sanctioned by the government. The government, they gave money to these groups to celebrate Africa, but it was very folkloric in a way. So it was a way that, yes, you can dress up this way in Brazil and it is okay, but it was still intimidating to some people. So when Ilya actually 74, 75, when they, in their first carnival, asking the question, which block is that? Which group is that?
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. This session has to end very soon. We have to prepare for the next session. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. We
Okay,
have to
so
prepare
I
for the
don't know. If I go back, I'm trying to follow, the kind of queries that I got, and I promise that I'm going to do a revision of this if they allow me to do a revised version. But it would take more than just a revision, because when Professor Afolabi was bringing out issues, I just felt like I don't believe it's not a Brazilian, because it was so comfortable in it, and this goes for everyone else. I mean, everyone on the panel. They were very serious issue. And when he says you stop, not just you stop, you didn't address that, like the issue of the images of the Orishas and so on. And the person said it was. Remember, this person is an art historian. She actually dig into it. So for her, it was more like, yes, this is what they do, but it's beyond that. Like you said, like you rightly said, it's beyond just taking pictures of things or seeing what they've done. There's a lot going on. That the same thing goes for Carnival. Someone asked a question about what happens after Carnival. Now, I think it was Christopher Dunn who said, who wrote, I think, one of the articles, the first article that I read, not, when I came to this part, when he called it a stage for Carnival, Afro-Brazilian Carnival, a stage for protest. So if you go to Rio, or if you go to, let me just stay with Rio, what we see as just the flashy, semi-naked women and all of that, when that's one perspective of Carnival. When you go to Bahia, this is opportunity for them. Yeah.
Sorry, we're going to have to start ending. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay, all right.
Okay, all right. So I'm
unfortunately,
I'm going to summarize this and to say thank you for everyone for going on this journey with me, so to say, because I feel like this is going to change. If I'm going to dabble into something, that I'll have to just give it the time it requires, because it's very educating for me, to see, how engaged, that the reader is in this, in this book. So thank you, and thank you very much.
Thank you too. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, folks. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all virtually.
Such a rich discussion. I'm really happy to have part of it.
Professor Afolabi, I may need to email you and talk to you, and also Felix and everyone else. I think.
Yeah.
We have
to talk about
those comments. Yes.
We have to talk about that term syncretism, Niyi. Okay.
We need to have a cottage and a beer together.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is huge.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.